To introduce myself, my name is Daniel Park. I'm the Library and Knowledge Service Manager for the Rotherham NHS Foundation Trust. Prior to that, I was a Library Manager at Harrogate District NHS Foundation Trust. And before then, I served 8 years with my good colleagues who are on the call today, Joel and Jenny, at Leeds Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. So I'm going to share my screen with you and the presentation will begin. Can everybody see that? I can't see anything now, so have I got thumbs?
Yes.
People see that. Super. Okay. Right. Well, thank you again for attending this practical workshop. It will be practical, so it won't just be me talking, I can assure you. So let's get the formal disclaimer out of the way. Although I've got some experience of coaching and mentoring, I am not formally trained to do either of these. The training I'm going through today came from a module from my Level 5 Operational Departmental Manager Apprenticeship from the Chartered Management Institute, which I successfully completed in January of this year. However, it is really important to remember that anyone with valid experience can mentor, and absolutely everyone can learn to coach. So there are no barriers to teaching or indeed learning about this topic. This certainly isn't a training course aimed solely at professional librarians or library managers. Library assistants and paraprofessionals can also be excellent coaches and mentors to their peers. So, without further ado, let's get going. In this session, and we always have one of these at the beginning of one of these talks, don't you? In this session, we're mostly going to be focusing on coaching, but we'll touch upon mentoring shortly and look at how and when to use these, because they are different from each other and each have their place when it comes to helping others in the workplace. We're going to look briefly at 3 coaching models, but focus on the simplest of these, and I'm going to demonstrate how you could use that in a coaching session. And then you get to have a go for yourselves in pairs, because lots of people learn best by doing. And finally, you will have a brief chance to reflect on what went well, what you've learned from the experience, timescales permitting. So, what's the difference between coaching and mentoring? You're all looking at this and trying to read this screen. Don't worry about it too much. Basically, in a nutshell, coaches draw information out of people. They draw information out of people. Mentors, on the other hand, push information into people. They push it into people. This helpful little diagram shows us that mentors use specialized knowledge and experience, the things they've gained over the years, to advise and to guide people. Coaches use very generic coaching skills to ask the questions that prompt people to learn for themselves. There are 2 other related disciplines we need to identify very briefly, though. Training, that packages up someone's special knowledge or experience into a series of lessons. And therapy, that uses knowledge and experience, usually in psychology, to counsel people who are struggling to help themselves. Now, obviously, coaching isn't either of these because it doesn't rely on specialized knowledge or experience. What makes coaching attractive is it can be learned as a standalone skill. It can be applied in almost any situation. In fact, as you see here with the know-nothing area, it actually helps if you know less about a topic being discussed. That way you can get the person you're coaching to do most of the running for themselves and explain what it is they want to get out of the coaching experience. Mentoring, on the other hand, requires you to share your life or work experience with your mentee. So the more you know about your topic, the more value your advice is and the better experience they are likely to have. Although we'll be primarily focusing on coaching in this session, it is important not to dismiss the power of mentoring. It may seem out of fashion to give people the benefit of your experience by talking at them these days, but mentoring can take many forms. And a casual discussion over a cup of coffee with opportunities to ask questions can be inspirational for the person being mentored, as well as an empowering experience for the mentor themselves, because they may not have actually fully realized just how much experience they had to share until they started sharing it. Now, before we go any further, let's have a closer look at a principle that underpins both coaching and mentoring, based on Joe Hirsch's book, The Feedback Fix. Hirsch explains that when coaches give feedback, they often act like what he calls window gazers. What he means by that is that we're looking out of the same window as the person we're coaching, just like that picture is. People are looking out the window because we're listening to what they have to say about themselves. But the person being coached is probably focusing on certain objects out of that window that are important to them. We, on the other hand, might notice other things in the landscape that we think are more important. Things that the individual we're coaching or mentoring doesn't think are a big priority, or perhaps hasn't even considered at all. Now, why is it important? Well, if you've ever asked for feedback from a job interview, as you're encouraged to do very often, you'll understand that while it can be helpful, sometimes it can be frustrating. Some of the advice you get back might not be relevant to you, or it can't be fixed. Some of it can be contradictory. Some of it can be misleading. Some of it can be downright insulting. Feedback like that can be counterproductive. It doesn't help the individual to grow and flourish. It can merely mean the interviewer is giving the feedback to stamp their judgment over the face of the unsuccessful candidate. We hope, as managers, we don't give feedback like that, but sometimes I'm afraid we do. So when we give feedback to the people that we coach or mentor, we need to stop gazing out of the window and trying to find something for the person to focus on. They'll do that themselves. Instead, we need to act as mirror holders. Our job isn't to impose our views on what we think needs to be fixed, but instead to hold a mirror up to show a reflection of the person we're coaching. And by doing that, the individual's much more likely to recognize what they see in that mirror as themselves and feel motivated and empowered to see their own issues, to make changes that matter to them. So rather than saying what we see, to use the old catchphrase, or rather what we think we see, as window gazers often do, we need to ask open questions and help the individual to peer into that reflection for themselves. Now, let me share this particular definition of coaching with you. It's from the seminal book on coaching for performance by Sir John Whitmore, which as of 2017 is in its 5th edition, 25th anniversary volume. So you know it's got a bit of staying power. Coaching is unlocking a person's potential to maximize their own performance. It is helping them to learn rather than teaching them. I find this quote really helpful. It stresses what we said, that coaching is about helping, not teaching. But helping can be difficult to quantify unless you have a structure to guide you, unless you have a roadmap to follow. Coaching models are simply a way of identifying and covering the essential elements of the coaching conversation in a way that's easy to remember, in an acronym, so that nothing gets missed. Some models are more detailed and have a more extensive structure than others, And it's your choice as a coach as to which one to pick. It can be dependent on the skill sets and experience of the coach. For example, a nervous or first-time coach may feel more reassured with a more detailed model, so nothing is missed. Though sometimes it may come across as a bit nitpicky to the individual being coached. On the other hand, some individuals being coached might prefer an easier style or a shorter model, while some may struggle and feel easily demotivated unless each element is spelt out, as you will see in these more detailed models. We'll briefly touch on 3 models in the next slides. I have a handout on these that will be posted at the end of the webinar, so you don't need to take too many notes on the last one. Okay, so I'll move on to the first slide, which is this particular model, the Achieve model. This model was created by Sabine Demblowski. It took me a long time to practice that, reading these through, and Fiona Eldridge in 2003 as a successor to the GROW model, which is the model we'll discuss later. As with all of these models, we are looking at the situation as is, assessing the current situation. We look at the goals that the person wants to meet, we choose options, and then we take action. The only real difference between these models is how many steps there are to each stage and which order the stages come in. With this one, assessing the situation comes before identifying a goal. So in this model, basing goals on what is realistic seems to be the favoured route. The Oscar model was initially developed by Mark Bucago and Paul Jackson in 2002, and it starts with the goal first, which this model calls the objective, before a realistic view of the current situation happens. Now, I find this bit here, this use of the term scale, very interesting, because it kind of infers that bigger challenges can happen if the person you're coaching believes that their objective is easier to reach. It acknowledges what we already know deep down, that having a positive mindset about your abilities to begin with can really help. Now, finally, the GROW model, developed by business coaches Graham Alexander, Alan Fine, and Sir John Whitmore in the late 80s, originally published in 1992 in the book I got that coaching definition from a couple of slides ago. It's the oldest of the 3, and perhaps it lacks the nuance of the others. The goal comes first, then the reality. Like Oscar, it's stressing the importance of a positive mindset, the will. Now, is that overly ambitious, or does it inspire the person being coached to think big and aim high? I think most of us can agree from the perspective of many of our shy and retiring library staff that encouraging a bit of confidence and self-belief before starting anything new probably wouldn't go amiss. One of the other advantages of using a simpler model like that is you can turn it into a cycle and use the reinforcement of that cycle to motivate a nervous individual during a single coaching session, or to inspire a more confident individual to commit to a higher goal. So in this model, we start with the goal, being specific about what the person intends to achieve by the end. That might be the end of the meeting, or it might be the end of the larger project. You then help the individual to look at the current situation and what's available to them in the way of resource or help. Once we know what we want and where we are, we can come up with options about how to make the journey. Think of it a bit like a day trip to the seaside. You can get there by bus, cheap, but it might take a very long time if it's a stopping service. By train, middling expense, but it might still be inconvenient if there are cancellations. By car, which is direct and quick, but it assumes that you've got the money to afford a car and the petrol, and that you know how to drive. Or of course you could just walk, assuming you have the stamina and the shoe leather. You might think of other options, but a pogo stick or a wheelie bin pulled by a team of huskies might be taking a brainstorming session a wee bit too far. In any case, you can help the person you're coaching to list out options and decide how feasible each one is before they choose which one or ones to try. And then finally, you have the will, the commitment, so to speak. Your job as a coach is to inspire action, not to actually do their work for them. So for the action to happen, there needs to be some kind of action plan. In our session today, we don't have the time to go into additional management models, but I'd imagine most people on the call today have heard of SMART goals. By helping the person being coached to check that their plan is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and has some kind of sensible time frame, we're going to be able to check on their progress of the plan far more easily in any subsequent coaching sessions. So let me show you how this works with a practice example. Let's say you've got an individual, the individual that I'm coaching wants to become a line manager. That's their goal. Their ideal is to permanently line manage one or more library assistants. That might involve getting a promotion to a position where they can become a line manager or moving on into a new job. What's the reality? Okay, there's a reality here. Well, perhaps they've given training to others or mentored others in the past. So they might have some experience of basic teaching and giving people information in a way that suits their needs. That's a good start, but part of the coaching process may involve teasing that out of them, especially if they're feeling modest about their own achievements. People can forget the advice that they've given people in the past and not think of that as giving advice or mentoring people, particularly if they are feeling quite self-conscious. You may need to ask them to reflect, to assess themselves so they can see their qualities, especially if they're shy or nervous. Now we come to the options bit. Well, they could be varied. The person could start with some background reading on line management, reflect on some management models. Maybe they could shadow someone who's a line manager already. Maybe they could temporarily mentor or line manage a library assistant who was happy to let them try doing that. Of course, not at appraisal. Who might else be available to help? If there's a lack of people to manage in the immediate team, it might mean approaching another manager and asking if they could temporarily mentor or line manage someone in their team. There are all sorts of ways of bridging the gap, but it's important that the person being coached is encouraged to consider and reflect on these ideas for themselves so that whatever option or options they choose are choices of their own making. And that helps improve their motivation to follow through on those choices, which of course neatly moves us to step 4, the way forward. That motivation to choose and follow through on an option is really important in the last stage. Both people have to agree on what needs to happen and when, preferably in some form of an action plan. In this example, perhaps background reading takes place in the first month. Maybe there's a week of shadowing a line manager, timetable in for after that, mentoring or line managing a library assistant scheduled for a few weeks later. Finally, perhaps these experiences get repeated to help an individual practice if a line management position becomes available later on. All of these are SMART goals. They're very specific. You can see if they've been done. Their achievability and realism depends on the situation, of course, but let's assume that in this example, it works out. And finally, we've come to set some timeframes. We've even committed to repeating the line management to make up for the time frame we can't factor in, which is how long it'll take for a job to be available for them to apply for. Now, even if the coaching happens on a regular basis, the GROW model will take some time to develop. For example, considering the goal might take more than one session. Any kind of self-assessment and reflection might well take longer than one session too. The options might take time to research, and certainly any action plan will need to be revisited on a regular basis and chopped up into milestones that can be reached more easily. But having an action plan with approximate timings in this last phase of the GROW model is going to keep the individual motivated when times get tough on the way to meeting their ultimate goal, which in this case was the goal of being a line manager. Now, this is the point that we have a bit of a practice, but before that, if anybody has any questions, I can't actually see any of you. All I can see is my screen. So I have got people that can let me know if hands are up, or indeed if you've typed anything in your screen.
Daniel, so I was just going to say, there's no questions in the chat. I just wanted to ask, will you be able to share your slides, because they are very good?
Of course, that's
Are you happy to?
These will be shared. That's not a problem at all. Sharing is caring.
And just one comment from Victoria. So she was saying her institution uses GROW as part of the annual appraisal programme.
Yeah, it's GROW is quite a commonly used one, and the one that I wanted to use today because it's the simplest. There are advantages to some of the longer models in terms of how specific it can be, but think about our literature searching, for example. A lot of us will use the what's the phrase? Isn't it? It's just slipped my mind because I'm talking. I'm having a brain fart. It's awful when these things happen.
I would say databases.
Yes, patient
PICO model.
Sorry, what did you say?
PICO, yeah.
Yes, PICO, exactly. Patient intervention comparison and outcome, the PICO model. Now, the PICO model doesn't always work for everybody, and there are lots of other models out there. There are spider models, and there must be half a dozen. But how can we always keep going back to PICO? Because it's simple. There's only 4 things there, and it helps people. It helps us grow. And usually it's memorable, but of course, when you're giving a presentation, it completely slips your mind. But yes, that's why the GROW model is quite a good one, why we're going to be using it today. The way this is going to work is each of us are going to be, I'm going to stop sharing this slide. Each of us, oops, there we go. Each of us is going to be split into groups of 2. Now, Paul has posted, or is about to post, some questions that you could help, that are useful in prompting, so that when you're using that GROW model, you have got extra questions. And there's also a template there that you can save somewhere and fill in if you want, so that you've got something to record things down on, or you can just scribble it down, those bits and pieces down on a piece of paper and use later on. It's past, so we've got a limited period of time. So without further ado, if people haven't got any more questions, I will let you break into groups and have a go for yourselves. So it wasn't my intention to take a lot of time in the plenary finding out what you've learned, because we do have 9 minutes, and you are divided into pairs, so asking each pair is going to take a very long time. So instead, I thought we'd try something different. This tip came directly from the Teaching Skills for Librarians training course written by Nina Shukla-Morris for HLG in April. And from the experience, what I was thinking was, if you can type this or shout out, can you outline any stars, any positive things you learned from the practice session, or maybe a wish, an area of practice that you think you'd like to improve?
I've raised my own hand, Daniel. It's Sophie. Can I do my own, because we had a really good discussion in my group. So rather than, I started typing it, and I'm thinking actually it'd be easier to say it. So we found the questions really useful. So just to start discussions. And so I think that's one of the stars, was actually it was really useful as prompts, and then the discussion kind of naturally then happened. So it was just a starting point to get the other person to think, it was a really good way to do it. And it also, some of the questions were naturally answered, which was really nice. So they almost became the next part of the chat. So my only wish would have been a longer session, because I think we could easily have turned that into a longer session to keep discussing things, because it was a very interesting conversation.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. The discussion that we had in the group that I was in also talked about those questions as useful prompts for people that might be demotivated, maybe nervous, and struggled with being coached, because coaching can be quite a daunting thing for the person being coached, even when they've plucked up the courage to be coached. And a lot of people have got issues related to whether they feel up to whatever it is that they want to advance onto. They may not feel worthy. There's this area of imposter syndrome, which we could have a whole session on imposter syndrome. It's very, very common in the library profession, in all aspects of it, whether it's public, academic, special, whatever. So yeah, okay, thank you for that. I'll just move on to the last slide. I'll just press it. We've got it there. So this is the kind of bit where we wrap things up, the obligatory wrap up of what we've learned. At the end of the session, you should now know how to choose whether it's better to coach or mentor the individual you want to help. As we found out, they're related but different options, and both have their place. Those of you that are NHS librarians will know of the 45 minutes with sessions that happen, where a library manager or somebody of that ilk will speak forth on what they've done. And that sounds terribly egotistical, but it really isn't. You learn an awful lot about the way that they got where they got, and things that they picked up over time that are useful guides for yourself. So that's an example of mentoring. You can consider which might be the best model to use. Now, we didn't go into that in detail, but again, in our session, we talked about that, in that, one of those models has the options first. So if you have somebody that isn't really goal motivated but just wants to develop themselves, you could start with that one. If you've got somebody that needs a hand holding and needs a little bit more time, wants things dividing up a bit more, maybe you've got an overachiever that wants to do everything at once, and the problem with the grow model is that you could end up swallowing the elephant instead of eating it in small chunks. Then doing it that way might be better. So it is partly dependent on the needs of the individual being coached, but it's also partly on your experience and comfort levels as a coach, whether you're comfortable with one that is a bit smaller and you're winging it to a certain extent, or one where you want things dividing up a little bit more. And finally, you had a go at coaching through the practice session that you completed with a colleague on the call. Hopefully you've had a chance to reflect on what you learned, although I appreciate, of course, that an hour is never enough to fully reflect. And finally, this would not be a library presentation, and I would not be a library manager without a bibliography of the authors who wrote the 3 coaching models I talked about today. You will get these slides if you want them, so you would be able to look those particular individuals up. So without further ado, I will stop sharing